Are you tired of painting the 100th goblin, skeleton or red person in the same exact color scheme? If so, grab some foam, unpack your popsicle sticks and rate your bits collection, because in this video we'll be making some old world army fillers. Painting an army for Warhammer can be challenging, especially when it consists of numerous models that look the same. Repeating the same painting steps over and over again is simply not an engaging part of the hobby, at least not for me. On another note, I also appreciate the slightly chaotic nature of armies that are not as coherent as, for example, the Empire or the High Elves. This is where army fillers come into play. Essentially, they are proxy models that are larger than your standard unit size. For example, if your regiment consists of models on 25mm square bases, like these goblins here, army fillers can have a footprint of 50x25, 50x50 or even 75x50mm. Depending on the footprint, these fillers can represent 2, 4 or 6 models. You can make them even bigger if you want to. The key is to find the right balance between playability and visual appeal. To showcase the potential of these army fillers, I've created 4 different ones. For 2 of them, I opted for a square layout measuring 50x50mm to enhance my goblin regiments. Additionally, in preparation for my orc regiment, I decided to give the other 2 fillers a footprint of 60x60mm, corresponding to 4 orc models. To achieve this, I simply glued 4 bases together. I typically use MDF bases for my big war chronicles, as their simple form and material make them ideal for this purpose. However, if you're using standard GW bases, I recommend using pre-existing bases, although obtaining a 60x60mm base could be challenging. As far as I know, GW doesn't sell 60mm square bases, and finding a suitable third-party substitute may prove to be quite a challenge. However, if you own a 3D printer, you could also print out a suitable size base. You'll find a link to an appropriate file in the description below. With the base size figured out and constructed or 3D printed, it's now a simple matter of figuring out what to put on top. In my last video, I suggested the occasional look into an artbook or 2, and this advice is valid for this project as well. 3 of my fillers were directly inspired by the artbook of Warhammer Online, while the 4th came to fruition by being inspired by a more, well, unusual source. The fungal garden was the only one not inspired by the aforementioned artbook. Rather, it was inspired by the 2nd episode of the series Hannibal. Admittedly, an unusual source for a fantasy-themed miniature. But if you have seen the series, and I highly recommend it if you have the, well, stomach for this sort of entertainment, you'll probably recognize where this idea came from. The main ingredient for this particular dish was, of course, fungi. I received a bunch of resin mushrooms and toadstools from Cromlech, who were kind enough to provide me with a nice selection of the products for the Big War Chronicles. If you're in need of mushrooms for your projects, you can follow the link in the description below to get your own. Plus, you receive a small discount by using the code CHROM48708, which will also provide me with a small kickback. I also used leftover bits from the Gloomspite Git Rockgut Troggoth set. Specifically, these 2 arms. I added a piece of bark in the center of the base and arranged both arms around it. My goal was to have one arm lying down, while the other one reached up. Once I was satisfied with the placement, I adhered them with super glue and used air drying clay to close the resulting gaps and create a more natural transition between the base surface and the bark. Although I had a bunch of mushrooms on hand for this build, I used the resulting waiting time to make some simple green stuff mushrooms. If you have seen my previous goblin-themed videos, you may recognize this method. I used small pieces of premixed green stuff and arranged them on a sheet of baking paper, or in this case, plastic. This way you get easy mushroom caps that only lack an appropriate stalk. You can simply rectify this by drilling holes into the bottom of the caps and adding thin wire pieces with superglue. With that you get easy, reproducible, smaller sized mushrooms that complement the larger resin mushrooms. And now you can simply add them wherever you like. But I've found that making small clusters of resin and green stuff fungi tends to look the most natural. The first filler for my future orc regiments was somewhat of a no-brainer for this kind of thing, at least in my mind. Totems are a huge part of the orcish aesthetics, so I wanted to make sure to incorporate at least one of these. Additionally, the Warhammer Online art book gave me a good base to work from. This one was primarily made with XPS foam blocks, and although I used my hot wire cutter for this, you definitely don't need it. A simple hobby knife suffices. In fact, I would go so far as to recommend using a hobby knife for carving out the greenskin head sculpture. Afterward, I rounded out the edges with a bit of sandpaper, remember to wear appropriate protection for this step, and textured the parts with an aluminum foil ball. To glue all the parts in place, I use PVA. I also added a few rough stones here and there, most notably for the teeth of the lower jaw. Now with 2 fillers done, it's the perfect time to showcase what the hobby community on Instagram has been creating for their own Big War Chronicles. You can find the featured profiles in the video description. If you like what you see, please pay them a visit and let them know that Matt from Lenrixram sent you their way. Of course, you can also join the Big War Chronicles yourself by simply posting your orc or goblin related projects under the hashtag Big War Chronicles. Next up on the agenda was the Gobbo Jibbit, directly inspired by this illustration in the art book. For it, I needed some sort of arched tree and the gibbet itself. Luckily, I had these decorative wood branches on hand, with one having the perfect shape for the hanging wood cage. Speaking of which, I built the gibbet out of wood sticks and coffee stir stick pieces. First I cut the sticks to size and sharpened the ends with my hobby knife. Just be careful not to make them too sharp to avoid injury. I arranged them about 1 centimeter apart and glued stir stick pieces onto them. Initially, I built 2 sides separately, which I then joined together after both were fully dry. I then added a few details, such as loose arrows and wooden nails, to the gibbet. The former were simply leftovers from my bits box, and the latter were toothpick pieces I cut to size. These were attached by first drilling holes, ensuring that these details would stay in place. To finish the building step of this piece, I attached an in-scale rope to suspend the cage. This particular rope is from Gale Force 9 and it is ideal for builds like this, but you can easily find more cost-effective substitutes. The last filler I wanted to build was actually the one thing that inspired this whole project. If you've played Warhammer Online, specifically on the destruction side, you may have noticed these stationary war drums. To me, these feel like a condensed version of what orcs and goblins are about. Wacky, unconventional and a bit impractical, but still somehow impressive. There is also a great illustration in the art book that depicts these drums, which served as a great reference for this build. I built the basic structure with popsicle sticks, wooden skewers and a few natural wood sticks. Here I made sure to keep the platform separate to allow for easy access for painting. the drums I used decorative wood chips that were the perfect diameter. I glued coffee stir stick pieces to the sides and added a layer of green stuff on top to create the drum head. I even added tears with my modeling tool and enhanced them with stitches made from short wire pieces. I used my needle nose pliers as a bending guide and attached the pieces by drilling holes into the drum head. A bit of super glue was all that was needed to keep these stitches in place. Although adding the stitches was a bit tedious, I found it well worth the effort. These war drums come with a fitting banner, which I also wanted to incorporate. For that I used a bit of green stuff, which I rolled out flat and let set for about half an hour. Then I cut away a few triangle pieces at the bottom to achieve a ragged cloth effect. Finally, I attached it to the previously constructed standard and let it dry. In the end, I added a few more details, such as ropes, wooden nails and a helmet on top of the standard. At this point I added texture paste, more mushrooms and a bit of flocks, stones and coarse sand, which reflected the base decorations of my orcs and goblins. What also reflected the army was the color scheme, which I won't get into much detail at this point. Basically, I used the same techniques and steps I already used on my goblin regiment. So if you are interested in a more detailed look, feel free to check out the video if you haven't already. And after painting everything and adding a fitting drummer to the drums and the skeleton to the gibbet, these fillers were ready for the big war. I am thrilled with how these big war army fillers turned out. They really add depth and interest to my regiment's look. Now I just need to get back to those orcs. Originally, this episode was meant to feature my orc regiment, but the models I intended to use took much longer to ship than I anticipated. Therefore, we ended up with this filler episode in the, well, most literal sense. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please don't forget to like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Also, if you want to join the Big War Chronicles yourself, you can do so by using the hashtag Big War Chronicles over on Instagram. And if you want me to, I would love to showcase your work on my next Big War Chronicles episode, where I'll be tackling the orc mob for real this time. So until then, you can check out another Warhammer Online inspired project. I hope to see you in the next one, and until then, farewell, fellow adventurers.